You know, we talk a lot on this show about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, the degenerative brain disease researchers have found affects athletes like football players who endure repeated hits to the head with each passing NFL season. As awareness increases, more and more players come forward with symptoms of the disease. And over the years, Boston researchers have been looking for clues among a bank of donated brains, including those of people like Junior Seau, Andre Waters, and Ken Stabler. And it's not just football. Researchers at the Veterans Affairs Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank have been studying the brains of athletes from other contact sports too, like boxing and hockey, and those of military combat veterans. And now they can add another category to the list, diplomat. When State Department Security Engineering Officer Mark Lenzi was working in the Chinese city of Guangzhou, he and his wife and ultimately more than 24 other U.S. foreign officers in China and Cuba reported hearing a strange noise, immediately followed by experiencing symptoms most often attributed to a mild traumatic brain injury. Now he's pledging to donate his brain after he dies to the Concussion Legacy Foundation so researchers can look for clues into what happened to him and them, too. Mark Lenzi was also a campaign staffer for John McCain in 2008 for his presidential run. He recently joined me. Mark, good to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
When did you first feel something was not right in your body, your head? What was that?
For me, it was October of 2017 when I first remember having headaches so much to the point where I reached out to my wife and said, hey, wait, and she was too, like I said, we need to do something, get a bottle of aspirin. Truth be told, at that time, the aspirin did help with our headaches, then as long as we get ahead of them.
Well, other than headaches, what did it feel like?
I don't call it dizziness, and I didn't call it dizziness at the time. I would call it more lightheadedness that I was having. But I was attributing, and my wife was too, that to the smog in Guangzhou. You mentioned you were in Guangzhou before. You know very well how smoggy it gets there. So with the headaches, and the sleep issues that I had, I was thinking, and my wife was too, that this is just because of the smog. Both my kids were having really bad bloody noses, to the extent it was soaking the sheets, and we were really concerned about the bloody noses there too. But we also thought, this must be the smog. The most disconcerting issue for me, Jim, was short-term memory loss, because I couldn't ascribe that to the smog, right? So much so that I was afraid that I had Alzheimer's disease. So my grandfather died early of Alzheimer's, and I thought, wait a minute, maybe I've got early onset here. I'm forgetting tool names, I'm forgetting things that I should know that I use on a daily basis. What's wrong?
How old were your kids when this happened?
3 and 8.
So when you hear critics say, oh, this is just mass hysteria, this is some psychological thing that spread from human, how do they explain that a 3-year-old kid was part of that?
They can't. I mean, that's why I'm speaking out now. That's why I've given my MRIs, everything in my medical file, not only to other, people like Concussion Legacy Foundation, other organizations like this, as many doctors as possible, but even to the media. I mean, I'll give you whatever
even
you want.
Even to the media?
Yeah, no, my medical file, because State Department's even come to me and said, well, some of your cognitive losses, you must be embarrassed about some of the stuff, so you might want to be quiet. I'm not embarrassed, and I want, for the sake of science, for all this to get out there.
Speaking of the State Department, when did you first learn that you were not alone, you and your wife were not alone, that there were others who had preceded you and there were others who had suffered from the same symptoms?
I remember it very well. It was May of last year, May of 2018. My neighbor, who only lived 8 feet from me in the same complex, she was medevaced in April of 2018. That's when I started putting together, and the State Department kept that very quiet, that she was medevaced, don't tell anyone, and she told them on 3 separate occasions after she was medevaced back to UPenn. On 3 different occasions, she begged State Department, she said, get the other Americans out. State Department ignored them, and it was up to me to kind of piece all this together, that was my neighbor, our symptoms. Hey, wait a minute, this is not right.
When you say the State Department ignored them, they ignored a lot of what was happening in China. But they didn't ignore similar sorts of things that were happening in Cuba. Is that not right?
No, they didn't. And I'll be honest with you, that has been a profound frustration with me. Luckily, Senator Shaheen and others on the Hill understand that and have been advocating for us. But yes, State, has at every step of the way tried to differentiate, tried to say that this is, it's different what happened. It's the exact same thing.
And as simple as the fact that Cuba is now an outcast and China we're trying to cut deals with as we speak?
Absolutely. It's very sensitive in terms of that. But I will tell you this, Jim, the country that did this to me is not China and it's not Cuba either. It's a country that I have a long history with, working for Senator John McCain. I've worked in all 15 former Soviet republics. I've been in a couple of revolutions that were anathema to the Kremlin.
So what did this? I mean, you've obviously spent your last couple of years of your life focused on this. What was the weaponry that caused this to you, your colleagues, your family, and people in Cuba?
This was a directed energy attack. It was a radio frequency, RF, attack in the microwave range. When people like you ask me this question, I'm always hesitant to say, oh, this is a microwave attack, because the first thing Americans usually think of is the kitchen appliance, right? But the fact of the matter is it's RF energy in the microwave range, somewhere around, I think, between 1 and 3 gigahertz.
And by the way, for those who are watching, who are saying that's fantasy stuff, it's ridiculous, the National Security Agency has confirmed 4 or 5 years ago that these kinds of weapons exist and do these kinds of...
Absolutely. The other thing that's important, Jim, is this isn't a lot of reporting that, oh, this is some super new weapon. No, it's not. The Soviets, going back 40 years ago, were developing this type of weaponry and have actually perfected it.
Let's move to the Concussion Legacy Foundation. I've had a lot of people sitting in a chair like that. Almost all of them were athletes, spouses, siblings of athletes. You don't fall into this. Why did you decide to contact them, and what was your agenda?
Actually, I do fall under it a little bit in the sense, and this is a neat New England story, is I was a sprinter for the Division I track team at the University of New Hampshire. And normally, I've been, I play all 4 major sports, and I, love ice hockey and things like this. So actually, having my athletic background has played a huge role in my recovery and being able to go back to UNH, work with my Division I track coach. He's one of the best, truly, in the country, Jim Belanger. Actually, having that athletic past for me was a big role in why I contacted the Concussion Legacy Foundation initially.
Why did you contact them?
Great question. I remember seeing Chris Nowinski on Frontline, and I remember seeing him on some of these big media outlets taking on the NFL and doing some of these things. And I remember I was like, you know what, I'm going to reach out to him. And more or less, I wasn't thinking at that time maybe pledging my brain. I was thinking more or less, look, I want to have a conversation with this guy. I want him maybe to put me in touch with other athletes that have had this type of their concussion, let's say, and dealing with post-concussion symptoms. I didn't expect him to write back to me. I thought, oh, this is just a lark, I'll try it. He wrote right back, and not only did he write right back, his response was such, it was wonderful being able to bounce things off him, talk to him about things like this, having him put me in touch with other former athletes that have been through these concussions. I can't tell you enough. Chris personally is just such a wonderful person.
And your symptoms, by the way, are not unlike those with these post-concussion things.
They're not unlike at all. In fact, it's been one of the good things in terms of my recovery is that therapists, my cognitive therapist, for instance, up at Mass General Affiliated Hospital, Wentworth Douglas in New Hampshire, hasn't had to reinvent the wheel.
What do you hope that someday CLF can tell the world about you?
Hopefully that day will come 40 years from now, but if it comes tomorrow or if it comes 5 years from now, what I really want them to do is do what they do with brains, and the best in the world at doing is doing the deep dives into this and exploring the brain. Unfortunately, I've had more MRIs than I want to tell you about for my brain, but unfortunately there's some things that you just can't tell about the brain because it's so complex until you actually physically get in and inspect it.
How are you now? How are you physically now?
I'm not 100%, but I'm a hell of a lot better than a year ago. The therapies, I do vestibular therapy, which is more or less balance therapy. I have to do convergence therapy for my eyes. Again, classic post-concussion
That's
stuff.
why you're wearing the glasses.
Well, yeah, I'm wearing the glasses actually for light sensitivity, which I still have. But that's significantly reduced. When I compare myself to about a year ago, the therapy has helped. I mean, I'd have to have sunglasses on right now, really, to be, with Klieg lights like this.
How do you've spent a huge part of your life serving your country. How do you feel about your country now?
I still feel as strongly as I do as serving, and I'm still serving my country, let's say. But I will tell you, Jim, it's been very tough on me, let's say being one of the 15 from China, being treated differently. I felt like we've been treated differently. The State Department has classified what happened in Cuba as a hostile action, and they want us to go around saying what happened in China is an incident. So like, what, a diplomatic incident? Tell that to my brain that this wasn't hostile action, right?
One last hypothetical, which may be impossible to answer. If your former boss was still the man he was on the Senate floor of the United States, John McCain, what do you think he'd be saying about this?
Well, he would, first of all, I'd call out the country that did this. I have no doubt in my mind that he would do that. I think had McCain been there and didn't have the brain cancer, he would have been able to pick up the phone and say, what the heck is, in a very McCain fashion, what is going on over there? I have a former employee that's not getting the help that he needs. Make it happen. So I've really felt his loss in more ways than one.
So is most of America. It's great to see you.
Thank you,
Good luck
Jim.
with everything.
Thank you.